Hi everyone, welcome back. If you could take your seats, please now, the last few of you. Okay, this session is about, has sustainability outflanked safety and security? Essentially, this is one of my favorite subjects at core, because we're talking about the human mind. Whether you're a Freudian, you're a Jungian, you're a Buddhist, or whatever the urges, hang-ups and drives that make our mind and feed our behavior, all that stuff is the topic of endless academic conversation, scientific study, philosophical treatises, and endless, in my case, barroom speculation. I'm sure you're all the same. How does the mind work? And this topic is a really good case in point, because many studies and surveys have been conducted over the years, always, up until now, always with the same result, that safety is the key priority of travelers. Additional studies by Google and Booking.com indicate that travelers do present concern for sustainability, but the thought-action gap persists. In other words, a lot of talk about it, but actually, is that what they're actually behaving like when they get to any destination? Now, in some way up to now, and I suspect boosted by the COVID, personal health, safety and security are seen as the paramount concern, and sustainability is seen as nice to have. But we're wrong, as we'll find out, I think, in this conversation, to think that these two factors are actually in competition with each other. They're not. And if that is the case, as we'll understand, what can industry do to combine those two factors and make us much more comfortable and much more willing to be aware of the sustainability issue too? So to enlighten us, we have several experts and very smart people and very entertaining people. So can I please bring on the stage, first of all, Carlos Senda Cruz, Partner and Chief Marketing Officer of Maybrian Technologies. Can I also bring on stage Alistair Crossley, Global Head of Travel Solutions for AXA. Alistair. Next up, Catherine Atkinson, CEO, Safer Tourism Foundation. And Isabel Hill, consultant, former director of United States Travel and Tourism Office, and currently advising government and the private sector on tourism. Okay. One. Now, the other thing is, I'm very conscious that yesterday, because of time, we didn't have questions from the audience, but I think this topic, and probably the next one too, will benefit from your opinions too. So please think of questions along the way, and I'll make sure that I find time to do that at the end. Okay, so let's start, Carlos, with what you and Maybrian have discovered. But actually, first of all, for our benefit, just explain what Maybrian is, please.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for having us here. Maybrian, it's a data intelligence company. We analyze trends using global sources, big data analysis based on technology, mainly AI. And today we're going to talk about some indicators we calculate regarding the perception and the evolution related to the spontaneous conversations in social media, what is called social listening, and that can help us to understand what travelers are thinking and what travelers are doing, as you were mentioning.
Okay, so you have some slides, some research that you've done.
Yeah, as a data company, we are always looking for proof points, right? So there is a lot of talking, but let's see how we can measure something, right? So I brought just 3 slides just to enlighten a little how is it evolving in terms of perception and in terms of interest. And this is an analysis from just 3 countries. We'll see Italy, we'll see France and Spain. And this is the evolution from the 19 on how the interest in terms of sustainability or security has been evolving since then. This refers to the interest. So in the travelers' conversations when talking about Italy in this case, how important was the all related to security or to sustainability, right? You see the blue line is related to security, and you see a clear peak when the pandemic started. That's obvious, right? So there was a lot of people traveling at that time that had issues, and we're talking spontaneously regarding security. That's an obviously, right? At that time, you can see how right before the pandemic starts, sustainability levels of interest were higher than security. When the pandemic starts, it overlaps, right, and takes over the interest in security regarding the sustainability. Then we got a valley. That's the lockdown. There were no conversations. There were no tourism conversations during a lot of time. That's why we have that kind of blackout, right? But then when everything starts again, we see how sustainability conversations regarding travel are skyrocketing again, right? And surpassing by far all related with security issues, right? And the second example, we'll see something similar. Maybe the increase in terms of sustainability regarding to the destination in Spain has been even higher, right? When it starts, you see this line coming up really fast, but the behavior has been really close to Italy. And France would be probably the case where we see a more different behavior in terms of the recovery of the travelers talking regarding sustainability and the country. One of the conclusions here is, first, is security. I mean, when travelers have their security clear, they start having interest in other matters. And in the case of sustainability, is one of the matters that is taking their attention for sure and growing.
Now, I think we have to have a kind of warning attached to this, because this is social media. These tend to be people who are kind of active in that world. And yes, they are talking a lot more about sustainability. And frankly, I'm not surprised after the year we've had, where we've had the hottest year on record all around the world, record temperatures here, wherever, wildfires, floods, the whole works. I'm not surprised they're talking about it. However, when it comes to action on the ground, when they arrive somewhere, are we right to assume that they are thinking about sustainability way over personal security?
That's a good question. I mean, we know what they talk about, but it's not that clear that they really act about that. They're really concerned, right? So we all know that there is still a gap in between perceptions and in between what we think we must do when traveling and what we actually do, right? And I'm approaching dearly the fact of investing or increasing our spending in terms of making more sustainable travels.
Yeah, and I would suggest that the context, the global context, makes a massive difference. If we had acts of terrorism, again, horrendously in European cities, for example, I suspect things would change very rapidly again. So I think we have to bear all that in mind. Okay, stay there. We're going to keep pursuing this topic. But Alistair, you are with AXA, who are one of the top 3 travel insurers in the world. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on people's concerns when it comes to insurance.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. And I think when we look at the playoff between safety and security versus sustainability, I think we're going to hear later on from some of the panel guests that they're inherently linked. But in terms of the last 3 years, we see a shift in behavior, and you talked about it in your introduction in terms of consumer behavior and traveler behavior. In the last 4 years, we've been locked down for 2.5 of those years, and then we've come back to travel. And how quickly we forget. Daniela and I were talking on Tuesday night about some of the protocols in the UK. The PCR test before you leave, the PCR test when you come back, day 2, day 8 test, lockdown. And it seems like a very distant memory now, but it's less than 2 years ago. And yet here we are. We've all traveled here from many places today without really thinking about that aspect, which is in the very near distant past. So I think our attitude towards safety and security, and I'm talking about the health, safety and security here, has shifted. We at AXA, and I'm sure many of the other insurers, still get many travelers calling us before they travel. What happens if I get sick in this country? What do I need to do? Do I need to quarantine? Will I be looked after? And that's our job to protect them as an industry. I think the other behavior we see is that of sustainability, and I think Carlos showed with some of the statistics that this is a trend that's been pre-COVID, that rise to sustainability. And we see in our data, we see a shift in terms of consumer behavior, traveler behavior. And that's backed up by a number of statistics, not only what Carlos has shared here, but if you look at the Booking.com statistics, 76% of travelers want to travel sustainably. I think you're right. There is a gap between what they want to do and what they actually do. And part of that might be that cost versus conscience piece for some.
Yep.
Many still think, over half still think it's too expensive to travel sustainably. But we do see an increase in people traveling to destinations that are atypical. We see an increase in Gen Z and millennials now buying travel insurance, which typically they didn't before, and they are going to different destinations. 52% of them are using social media, you talked about, in order to decide where they want to go. So we do see a shift in consumer behavior as to where to travel.
So what are you saying then? That younger people tend to take more risks, if you like, in terms of where they choose to go. They want to push it a bit. They want to go to places that people haven't been to before. That means that what does that mean to you? That they are less concerned in a sense than their parents about personal safety?
Typically, the younger generation are always less concerned. It doesn't matter whether it's
travel.
travel.
That once, we? Yeah.
I've got teenage kids, so I know that they're not concerned. But pre-COVID, the Gen Z, the millennial segment would not have bought travel insurance because their attitude to risk was very, very low. What we see now is our fastest growing segment, and by 2025, half of all of our customers will be Gen Z and millennials. So they now have a different attitude to risk. Now, whether that's because of COVID and they've been locked down and they want to ensure they're safe when they travel, possibly. Is it because of the cost of living crisis and they want to protect their investment? Possibly. It could be a combination of those two and other things as well, but they are having a different attitude to risk. And as insurers, we have to evolve constantly to ensure we understand and value the risk appetite and attitude that our customers are portraying.
Just remind us of how your business works in terms of, you've got shareholders, I presume, haven't you? Yeah. So you need to make profits, and therefore you make money from insuring people and making sure that you make money out of that, I guess, ultimately. Yep.
Indeed, yes.
And then you charge higher premiums, I presume, for certain kinds of travel?
Yeah, I think I would say that the premium is linked to the risk. And so the higher risk that is proposed, then the higher the premium. So you can pick different destinations around the world, and they'll have a different premium associated with them. So the risk that you might pose to us as an insurance community if you travel to Spain with family to sit by the beach for 2 weeks is very different if you want to go hiking around Colombia, Guatemala, and some other areas in South America. So we have to price accordingly. It's our job also to balance that with ensuring that you're safe and protected. And communicating with our travelers so that when they go to these destinations, they understand the risks that are there, and us giving them advice to help de-risk their situation, de-risk their travel, to keep them safe ultimately and protect them.
Now, there have always been floods, crises, disasters, wars, whatever. However, with climate change and with the such obvious effects of climate change that we've all felt personally, experienced this year, is that changing the insurance industry's view of certain places? For example, the island in Greece, which had the wildfires, would you charge a higher premium for people going there?
I think it's very difficult to start pinpointing and I would say very localized. I mean, Rhodes is a fairly big island, but a very localized area of risk, because the chances of that then happening again next summer are fairly small. The travel industry, we have a summer peak, and we are always used to dealing with issues, risks, challenges. There's always a strike somewhere, air traffic control, earthquakes, and then the climate change based issues. So whether that's wildfires, which we saw in Greece, but also in Hawaii as well.
Yep.
We've seen some devastating storms. I think that we had a speaker yesterday from Greece who talked about the storm that has caused huge damage in Greece fairly recently. Even in the UK today, we've got a red risk for Northern England and Scotland, loss of life from storm damage. So we wouldn't adjust our premium based on specific localities like that, but actually it's our job to understand climate change and to understand the risk that poses and to price accordingly. And part of what AXA does is ensure that actually climate is one of its key strands for understanding. So we do look very carefully at all risks, whether that's environmental risks and climate change or whether it's geopolitical. But you're right, the balance is shifting much more towards climate change risk.
Yeah, so you've got analysts who work for you who are looking at the potential repercussions of climate change as its effects become more and more acute. So, for example, in 30 years' time, they're talking about Southern Europe being extremely hot. This area, actually, we're talking 40, 45 degrees regularly, if not already, but regularly now. That presents a danger to certain types of people. Can you imagine in the future that for maybe elderly people who are not so well, that there will actually be a higher premium to go to places that used to be regular, safe places to go because of the changing climate?
I don't see that those long-term climate change risks will have an impact on premium, because you can go to those areas of the world now with those temperatures, and we don't price differently to go to a hot country versus a cold country now. It's more about your security risk that you pose. So, and linked to that, the biggest cost that we incur from an insurance perspective when customers travel is if they get sick.
Is what?
If they get sick.
Okay.
And the health benefits we have to provide to them, and then repatriation back.
Yeah.
So that has a higher weight in terms of the premium. We wouldn't be pricing based on just a temperature range or anything like that.
But can I suggest that the paradigm might change in the future, that you might be starting to factor in these things like changing climate in certain areas in terms of how you work out your insurance premiums?
You're absolutely right, and it will do. And you can have parametric insurance today that will pay out if you go on holiday somewhere and you don't get the sunshine you expected, or you go skiing, you don't get the snow that you expected. It's not an appetite that AXA wants to be in just yet, but I can see that will shift in time for not just for AXA, but for all insurers.
For all insurers, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Kathy, excuse me 1 second. I'm just going to get my, there we go. Explain first of all your organisation and what it does, and what you are trying to do with encouraging personal responsibility.
Yeah, so Safer Tourism Foundation is an independent charity. It was set up, as many charities are, in the aftermath of a family tragedy, the deaths of 2 children from carbon monoxide poisoning on holiday. Some of you will, I'm sure, remember that. So our aim is to prevent people from dying or from suffering serious harm when they're travelling. Largely UK outbound customers. We work with a whole range of organisations, travel companies, UK government, other NGOs to try and prevent people from getting into trouble. And we're particularly interested in what people do when they're travelling, so after they've made the booking. And we've talked a lot this morning, haven't we, about the decisions, about the types of holidays that people want to book. And I guess where we're really trying to focus our attention is, so when people are travelling, that can have a huge impact both on the sustainability footprint of a trip, but also on people's safety as well. So I've got 3 things, if I can, Rajan, to say. One is an assertion. Some of you may not agree with this, but one is assertion. 2 is a kind of working hypothesis, and then I've got some ideas as to how we might solve some of these problems. But my assertion is this, is that customer expectations of their provider and themselves are lopsided. So what I mean by that is that many people this morning have said customers automatically expect travel to be safe. You buy a trip, you expect it to be provided in a way that's going to be safe. People look on sustainability much more as a discretionary, and we've talked a bit about that this morning. But I think what's really interesting in both cases is that travellers expect their provider to be more in control in terms of the delivery. So they expect their provider to be providing a safe and sustainable product. And they underplay their own personal responsibility in both of those areas. Now, Safer Tourism collects incident data, customer incident data around safety incidents from a whole range of travel companies. And I have to say, in the majority of those incidents that we look at, customer decision-making and customer behavior has played a role in that incident. I'm not blaming them, but I'm just saying there's something they did do that contributed to that incident, or perhaps something they didn't do that might have prevented it. And so we are really interested in how we can help people to take on that personal responsibility. And the same applies in the area of sustainability. There's lots of research in the last 20 years that will suggest that people do not transfer the pro-environment behaviors they exhibit at home to a holiday context. They behave differently. So my working hypothesis is something that at Safer Tourism we call the holiday head, and here's my little story around this. Now, what self-respecting parent would put their 10-year-old son on a motorbike in Pushkar, Rajasthan, wearing shorts and a baseball cap for protection? Something happens to us when we go away. And it's the same in sustainability. It's the same in safety. So why do people behave differently on holiday? What's going on in their head, in their holiday head? So that we make decisions that we would never contemplate at home. I would never do that at home. Sorry, it's me. I would never do that at home. I think we talked a bit this morning about the need for education, particularly around sustainability. I would argue that actually just telling people about stuff doesn't in itself change behavior.
Yep.
Raising awareness, giving people more information will not on its own make people act differently. We have to be cleverer. Human beings are complex. There's all sorts of other influences at play in these decisions that we make. And I think that helps us to unpick this intention-action gap. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So what we're doing at Safer Tourism, we're actually really trying to dig into this and understand it. And we're using something called the COM-B model of behavior change. This is actually a model that was developed by the academic team at University College London. It's used quite widely across the UK government, including in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and also in the private sector. And it's a way of understanding the influences on behavior so that you can then intervene to try and use those influences to get people to behave, in this case, to keep themselves safe and to actually deliver the sustainability outcomes of their trip that most people want. Most people don't go on holiday either trying to hurt themselves or destroy the planet. So really, really briefly, the COM-B model, C-O-M-B, C is capability. So in this case, did I know what I needed to do? Was I physically capable of clipping a helmet onto my son's head? Yeah. O is the opportunity. So that's the physical and social environment in which decisions are made. So do I have the right kit, the right time, enough money? Are people around me doing what I'm going to be doing? So do I feel it's socially acceptable? And then the M is motivation. That's, do I want to do it? Do I think it's important? Do I believe that it's something valuable to do? Is it a habit? And that these three kinds of influences act together to influence individual behavior in the moment. And my working hypothesis is that I think some of the psychological, social, and environmental influences that are at play are common across the decisions we make in relation to safety and the decisions we make in relation to sustainability. And I'm just going to put, and I'll shut up then, Rajan, just a couple of quick examples that apply to me. So one is around recycling. Now, I recycle religiously at home. Every week, every Tuesday night, I can see all my neighbours put out their recycling bins, so I never forget because I can't avoid it. And every year, my local authority tells me what percentage of our waste we've managed to recycle, and then sets a target for the next year, so I get feedback. When I go on holiday, I'm not quite as careful. Why is that? Well, it's going to take me a little bit more effort to recycle. I've probably got to collect up all my plastics, find the bins. Then when I get to the bins, I've got to figure out which bottle goes in which bin using the little pictures that are always there. And there's no one really to prompt me to do it. There's none of my neighbours are out there giving me that reminder. Wearing a seatbelt is my safety example. Again, I'm really confessing here. So at home, I don't even pull out of the drive without putting my seatbelt on. But when I'm on holiday, I'll hop in a taxi and I don't really worry if the seatbelts aren't working or the driver isn't wearing one, and it's okay. Now, in the UK in the 1990s, legislation was brought in to help us all behave in a way that kept us safe. So wearing a seatbelt became compulsory by law. But over the years, that's now really not the driver. It's socially unacceptable to get in a car and not wear your seatbelt. So the drivers for our behavior have changed over those years, and it's become a social norm. And I guess what I want to pull out of these two examples is that our decisions in relation to safety and sustainability are not driven by rational decision-making based on all the available information that we carefully analyze. They're driven by norms, habits, and values. And so that's where we need to be putting our attention if we're going to try and shift the dial.
Okay, so with the safety belt laws, what did change people's behaviour then? If it wasn't being rational, why did they start all wearing seatbelts?
Well, first of all, we had to because we were going to be fined if we didn't.
Yep.
Then there was a whole load of really quite gruesome TV adverts that were put on, some of which are burned in my brain, and I really wish I could unsee them. And then over the years, we got into a habit. So we don't think about it anymore. We get in the car and automatically, we drive on the left, so we're a bit strange, but we go ka-chink, and it's on. I wouldn't let any of my kids or anyone else in the car go anywhere. And if I do go anywhere, I've got this annoying buzzer that beeps at me until I put the seatbelt on. So there's literally no way of avoiding it. It's a norm. It's rewarded, if you like, because I lose that horrible buzzer noise. Yep. And I know that I'm going to get punished if I don't put it on. So those are all working together to keep me belted up and safe.
So we're going back to human behaviour, and essentially again, and as you're suggesting, people are doing it and it's become habit. How can we transfer that attitude and the way that that's changed to behaving more sustainably?
Yeah, well, I think that, so when I look back at the examples that I've used, what stopped me putting the helmet on my son's head? It wasn't that I didn't know that helmet was a good idea. Of course I knew that. There was no helmet there. No one gave me a helmet. I hadn't seen any images. We were going off on a camel safari outside Pushkar. When I booked the trip, I don't think I saw any images of people on the bikes taking us to see the camels. The guys who turned up on the motorbikes weren't wearing helmets. No one, as you look on the picture, no one in Pushkar wore a helmet. So the social norm that I was picking up was that it was completely fine to hop on a bike with no crash helmet. Are the roads any softer in India? I don't think so. So I needed the environment to help me do what I knew I needed to do. Somebody should have given me a helmet. They should show me images of a helmet. The guys on the bike should have shown up with the helmet, maybe incentivize them so that they don't actually leave with us on the bike. That's my husband, by the way, on the back of the bike. He's no better. You could incentivize the motorbike guys. How about they get a bonus if every client straps up and wears a helmet? So all of those factors might have made a difference and kept, thankfully, nothing happened to either of them, but it could have been very different.
I mean, we're talking what we call, and what you might know as nudge theory, right? We're talking about pushing people towards making the right choices, either for your personal health or for sustainable reasons. Is that what you're saying?
It's a little bit, most people, when you say behavior change, think of nudge. Nudge is a very specific type of intervention. It's about changing what they call the choice architecture. So you put smaller plates at the buffet, people hopefully eat less food, there's less food waste. That's a nudge. You're changing the external environment. What nudge doesn't do is really explain what's going on in our heads in order for me to make that decision. So nudge is a particular type of behavior change intervention. It's fine in some cases, but it's not going to fix all our problems.
I mean, I've seen surveys where it's shown that actually the biggest reason why people change their behavior is shame. They don't want to be shamed into being the one that's not doing the right thing. And I'm presuming that there is a kind of tipping point, a bit like with recycling stuff, where you suddenly think, am I the only person that's not actually putting this in the right bin and that in the right bin? Because everyone else is telling me that they do it. Shit, I don't want to be the only one that's not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to frame it a little bit more positively around, a positive social norm. I mean, a good example, let me see, I pulled this out of my hotel this morning. Please, no more of these. What do I want to do with my towel? Do I want to leave my towel on the hook and have it replaced, or do I want to leave it on the other way around? Leave it on the floor, have it replaced, or leave it on the hook and use it tomorrow? What we need is for the default choice to be the thing we want. So the default would be you don't need a clean towel every day. Don't give me that choice. The default is I don't get my towels changed. If I make a real mess of my towel, I can phone the reception and maybe get a new one. But until that point, make the default the option that we want.
Similarly, plastic bottles. Don't give people the choice to have plastic bottles in their hotel. Radisson don't, by the way, I've noticed that. Glass bottles or whatever. Here, we've got paper, or replacement stuff, So, another example of that. So basically you're saying, give them less choice.
Give them less choice or make the choice an easy one. So make the default what you want and make it easy for people. That's classic nudge. In terms of the social norms, they are so powerful, and we could use those in terms of sustainability behaviors. So I don't know if any of you have sort of smart electricity and gas meters. If you have smart meters, suddenly you start to take more interest in the energy you're using. WTTC, I don't know if they're in the room at the moment, but they did a really interesting a study which was based on behavioral economics, which is the foundation of some of this behavior change science. And they looked at the messages that you gave people, again, around this wretched towel issue, of telling people how many previous customers in this room, the room that you're staying in, had kept their towels. So you're creating a social norm, a social expectation, and a little bit of healthy competition that thinks, well, actually, I want to be part of that club, the sustainability club. So I think we can be much cleverer in using our intrinsic desire to be part of a tribe to promote good pro-sustainability and pro-safety behaviors.
Thank you. I think we'll ask as well from other suggestions for sustainable practices like that, how we can push towards that. By the way, in response to your notion of why, when we go abroad, do we behave completely differently, unfortunately, that's part of the attraction of going abroad. You are not being yourself. I'll give you a quote from a writer from the, I think, late 19th century, who said that it's good to go abroad because that way we can shake off with one mighty effort the fetters of habit, the leaden weight of routine, the cloak of many cares, and the slavery of home. Yes, I'm not feeling all that. I'm abroad. I can be this. I can be a completely different person. Unfortunately, that does involve, as you say, getting rid of the normal risk aversion that we have when we're at home.
Yeah, we absolutely do not want to pop that holiday bubble. Why do we travel? Because it makes us feel good, mostly. So we don't want to spoil that. But what we have to do is, in that moment, because as I said right at the beginning, people don't want to come home injured or worse. And people don't generally want to trash the planet. So we just have to help them in that moment do what actually they want to do anyway and make it easy for them.
Okay, thank you. Now, Isabel, you have been thinking an awful lot about why sustainability is normally ranked below personal safety and health and all that sort of stuff. And you think that actually it's a misrepresentation of how we should be looking at things. So explain your position, please.
Yes. Good afternoon. I think going back to the data that we saw earlier, I think there's actually an interesting perspective that can explain that shift post-pandemic. And that is that actually the effects, particularly of climate, actually are the biggest risk to the planet and to travel and tourism. And it is, in fact, something we wish, in a sense, behaviorally to deny or ignore. It is an existential problem. And I think that there has been much more awareness after the pandemic of the relationship between sustainability and risk. And I think this got my attention some years ago, which is why I've been pondering it for a while. And that was back in, I guess, about 2012. The reports began to come out about the Department of Defense and the national intelligence community in the United States identified climate as a national security risk. And in reading that report, it was fascinating at the time and is even more fascinating today. So why is it a national security risk, climate change? It's because as the planet heats up, there are a number of interrelated problems, and those problems begin with the rising temperature. Today, there are some 5 million people that already die from heat, from excessive heat, and that is escalating rapidly, as we know. The heat also affects land, so that land becomes more arid, and you look at places, particularly the desertification in sub-Saharan Africa, eastern China, the Mideast, and other places, and the land that is now available for agriculture dries up. The water also, the resources around that dry up. This means that the land is uninhabitable and there is mass migration. And we have climate migration today, but we think of it as economic migration. But in fact, it is migration from climate. And so what happens then? You have over time areas of the world that become essentially uninhabitable. As you have rising sea levels, you have encroachment onto fresh water, and you have both salinity and waste problems. So these are very complex, interrelated problems that are going to require tremendous response from governments in terms of humanitarian assistance and in terms of other things. So what does that mean to the travel and tourism sector? What that means is that, number one, not only do you have human migration, but you have animal migration at the same time. And as animals and humans begin to move together, you have increase in potential transmission of pathogens, which we saw in COVID already. So what is the biggest existential problem for travel and tourism? Pandemic. Previously we thought it was terrorism, and that is no longer the case. It is health. So you also have the problem that as you have this climate migration, authorities feel the need to thicken the borders, to harden the borders. It becomes much more difficult for the travel and tourism industry to have this lovely, seamless travel experience that we have enjoyed over these last few years. You also have competition for resources. We live in a time where we have this bizarre kind of situation where we have tremendous food waste, particularly in the travel and tourism sector. And food waste, as many of you know, is the third largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. It's equivalent at 8% to aviation. Yet we've spent a great deal of time talking about aviation. And
I did not know that. Is that right? Food waste?
Yeah, in the United States it exceeds.
It's the third biggest contributor to what?
To greenhouse gas emissions. So not all of it is in the consumption side. Arguably, it's also true that a lot of it is at the production side. But the whole cycle is problematic at a time when we have rising food costs and competition for resources. And those competition for resources we're already beginning to see, where some cruise lines, for example, when they go to certain destinations, are having to make agreements about not bringing fresh water on board, which is driving innovation and some of the technology we heard about earlier. And so I think that what we are seeing here is also changes, as we've heard earlier today, in the destinations themselves, the offerings of those destinations, and how you respond to that. Do you want to put snow consistently on mountaintops that are getting hotter and hotter?
Yep.
That strikes me as an unsustainable practice over time, probably a good short term. But in the long term, you're going to have to look at your destinations differently. Also, as we well know, the need for resilience increases as we have increases in not only extreme heat, but extreme weather events. And so I think it's very interesting in many respects that the human behavior part affects not only the individual traveler, but I would argue it is affecting the industry overall. That in many respects, we have a certain level of denial. We have already passed 6 of the 9 thresholds, in terms of the conditions that are necessary for human life on the planet. And those planetary boundaries are continuing to evolve. And, yet we sit here and talk largely about smaller incremental change. So I think the whole risk situation in terms of people's concern about risk and sustainability are inextricably linked from now to the future.
At the same time, there is still this perception, surely, that what you're talking about is sometime in the future, sometime in this, and the 5 million who are migrating because of the lack of rules, that is an
No, those are 5 million dead
I beg your pardon. You're
from
quite right.
extreme heat.
Yep,
yes.
fair
we
enough,
have
sorry.
many, many more migrants, as many of you in Europe are aware.
Okay. But I'm just being, I guess, cynical about the human mind, and that is they're still not thinking of that on equal terms as their own personal health and security.
No, because we don't make the link in our heads particularly. I think we're beginning to, and I think that's what the data, I suspect, is beginning to show us. I know that it is beginning to show up in some of the data and some of the destinations in the United States, that there is a shift in the timing of travel because people are beginning to be aware of the fact that it is really very hot in New York in certain times of the year. And so they're already beginning to see shifts in travel behavior. So people are responding, but certainly not with, I think, the sense of urgency. And I would argue that the industry itself certainly is not responding with the sense of urgency needed, not only for the survival of the industry itself, but for the planet as a whole.
And what we were talking about the other night, by the way, was this whole idea, which is very real, that people will be fighting over water
Yes.
in the future.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly conceivable. And, the interesting point that you may have noticed is that the first reports that I was reading, which I've summarized here, were back in 2012. And all of these things are happening today. We are in it now. It is not something that is coming down the pike. And one of the things that I think that in terms of human behavior, we tend to think of things in sort of a linear progression, like, okay, well, we're sort of okay because maybe there's a chance that 30 whatever % of unknown technologies are going to solve this problem for us. And maybe it's okay if we don't reach, the targets that we all said, because maybe they really don't know. In fact, it is not a linear progression. It is a geometric progression because each one of these elements affects the other. And it is true the scientists don't know, and there are tipping points. We just don't exactly know where they are. I would argue we really don't want to find out.
We're putting our heads in the sand. We don't want to think about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's very interesting post-pandemic, for example. Let's just take that one example. So, across the travel and tourism sector, I don't think we have ever experienced anything, at least in terms of the data that has been collected, as we experienced in the pandemic, in terms of wiping out businesses and the industry as a whole. And yes, we are in a recovery mode. Everybody wants to focus on that recovery. We don't want to think about where we were for the reasons that you were talking about. And yet, I don't see the kind of leadership. I was involved in the COVID Recovery Task Force in the United States when we were trying to figure out how to keep travel moving across the borders. And it was hugely complex. We had some areas in the world where they were coming up with this red light, green light, yellow light system. In the United States, we've never thought that was an appropriate system. The minute something is red, once you can measure it, you've already, like, the horse is out of the barn. And in the years where we dealt with counterterrorism, we learned that the best approach to security is the individual risk. So that's where we came up with these sort of protocols on measuring individual risk as individuals came into our country, whether they were vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. But interestingly, although we sort of ultimately got there, where is that conversation going on between governments and the sector in terms of preparing for future pandemics? There are technologies out there which we should be focusing on, which we should be investing in, and which should be encouraging governments to adopt. We developed an entire technological framework for counterterrorism. And arguably, we can talk about whether it's too expensive or a security theater or whatever, but we've reduced the risk. There are technologies, particularly for pathogens, that you can use breathalyzers for that have been developed in different countries that could possibly be deployed. We need to accelerate that for the travel and tourism sector, but certainly for the public health of the world. And yet I don't see that conversation happening because, again, to your point, human behavior is such that we just want to get on with it. And perhaps we all have a little bit of holiday head at this point.
Yeah. Now, I did promise that if people wanted to ask questions or make very quick points, please feel free. So If you've got one, put your hand up, and people will find you with the microphones. Please do contribute. Because I think
Roger,
that's
Roger,
important.
just while people are thinking their
Yeah,
questions, can I just respond to, because what Isabel says resonates really strongly with me. But one thing we didn't talk about when I was speaking is, and many of you will know about something called confirmation bias. So this is one example of a cognitive bias, a kind of shortcut in thinking that most of us do. We're just human, we do it all the time. But one bias that, if we had more time, we could talk about is something called temporal discounting, which means that you value a benefit that's in the short term much higher than you would a benefit that's the long term. It's why I still eat a packet of crisps or potato chips when actually I'm trying to be on a health kick, because the instantaneous gratification I get from that is worth, that long term. I don't value that long term benefit as much. And the same is happening in climate change. And there's a lot of research that shows that we are all individually and collectively and as an industry succumbing to that particular cognitive bias, temporal discounting. We are not assessing the risk that's a long way in the future as well as we should, and we do not compare it adequately with a short-term risk. I'm sure Alistair can talk a lot about that.
Well, exactly. I was going to say that. And by the way, I'm the worst of that one. That's why I've got such a terrible pension, because I just didn't start saving. I'm thinking about now, and even now I'm like that, which is terrible. But yes, okay, the question just from there. And then I will ask you to react. Yep.
Hello, I'm Lee Miles, Bournemouth University, Professor of Crisis and Disaster Management, so I should say that and one of the speakers. Hello, Isabel. Nice to see you again. I just wanted to make a point in relation to the relationship, which is the challenge for the travel and tourism sector in relation to the pandemic. We perceived that we got through the pandemic, which was really by effectively damaging the travel and tourism sector by allowing not things to happen. And as soon as we got through the pandemic, we removed those restrictions with the perception that the travel and tourism sector will revive. So how do we get round the transactional relationship that's been developed between that? And it goes back to Rajan's point, that basically the fear in the sector is that if we introduce more measures to deal with sustainability, that will have a negative impact on flows in the same way that the pandemic did. And how do we move to your position where we're actually talking about getting away from confirmation biases, transactional thinking, to a more deep-seated, where sustainability and the survival of travel and tourism go hand in hand. They're not transactional.
Any reaction to that? Yes, Isabel.
Yes, and I think it gets back. There's an interesting point that I've been seeing over time, and that is explained in what Kathleen is talking about, and that is travelers actually aren't interested in those transactions, right? And this is where I think that there really needs to be, in my opinion, greater leadership. There seems to be a view that if we educate the travelers enough, that we are a demand-driven sector, and therefore traveler behavior is going to change, and they are going to make us do the right thing. I don't think that's the answer. I think we do need to go there. It's yes and I believe that what we need is to say, okay, everybody take away the buffet. Now, that may mean going to the authorities, because that transactionally is problematic because people are concerned about their competitive advantage, et cetera. But smart regulation, come in and say, what are the regulations that you can live with around this food waste issue, and let's drive some smart regulation up front so that it takes away the competitive disadvantage. And this is the kind of thing that we need to be talking about in terms of we need to collaborate for the solution. And there are impediments to that collaboration, right? I mean, I could talk a lot about what the industry can be doing to collaborate in order to remove the competitive disadvantages that they're concerned about. We need to stop competing on sustainability. We need to move the idea of the pre-competitive space and collaborate in sustainability as pre-competitive. And if there are impediments to that, which would affect, for example, airlines and things that deal with antitrust regulation, let's either develop some kind of framework that will help us use that market power to invest in innovation through third-party foundations or something along those lines. But let's stop competing on this issue, because that's where we get stuck on this transactional problem. And good to see you again.
The clock has just told me it was not working just now, but time is up. But
Sorry.
one
Okay,
last
no,
point. Yeah, yeah.
just in response on the safety point, similarly, I don't think, most of the companies we work with don't see safety as a competitive issue as well. It should be. Who, if they're your customer this year, they may be somebody else's customer next year. One thing COVID showed us was that suddenly safety was the sexy place to work. Yeah, for the first time ever, we saw safety on the homepage of almost every single travel provider. Safety teams in companies suddenly had kudos, and they had budgets and staffing they'd never had before. That's gone again, actually. But what we can do is build on that. There was a bridging during COVID between the product developers, the marketeers, the salespeople, and the safety teams. And I think actually what we need to do is try and have a more mature conversation with the customer. Customers, as I said, mostly don't want to trash the planet. Mostly they want to have a safe holiday. So their interests are our interests. We've got to find ways to talk to them as adults, not pretend nothing bad is ever going to happen. The sun will always shine and the planet can continue to burn. Yeah, we've got to be more mature, and there may be costs. And I just don't see any national government currently actually, owning up to the fact that this is going to cost us. But actually, we want a safe future, and we want a sustainable future for our planet, and we want to travel.
But I would also point out that last year we spent $7 trillion in subsidies to one of the most profitable industries in the world. Which is to say the fossil fuel industry. Perhaps we could reconsider the deployment of those resources to a transitional plan. Clearly we are going to be working with and need to have fossil fuels for some period of time, which some people on the other side of this conversation don't like to acknowledge. But I would argue that in subsidizing that industry, we are perhaps missing the opportunity.
Yeah. We've actually bought some more time for some reason, so that's good. And I want to get any other questions, please? Please raise your hand. There's a gentleman over there. While I'm doing that, any reactions to what that
Yeah, to the point of regulations, in my opinion, I'm on both in the case of sustainability and safety. I'm much more in the part of education of the host communities. It's not about applying regulation, it's about finding when you're traveling, the context you find when you travel to a destination, it's aligned with your values, with the way of living, your safety, and the way you behave at home, right? I know that's a difficult solution, but I think it's the base to start really changing the way we act.
Well, actually, you raise a very good point there. Because basically it does work with the human behavior thing and not wanting to be shamed or not wanting to act as locals do. So if you encourage that kind of attitude, that behavior in destinations where the host community are very educated and are hammering home, this is what you've got to do, then when in Rome, hopefully tourists will act in the right way.
You'll behave the same way you see in your context, right? That's absolutely human. And
unless you're British, by the way, which is, well, they just act like they do. I'm joking. No,
and just a brief note back to the note of the climate change Isabel was mentioning. It is a direct relation on the charts we saw right in the beginning on the data. If we compare the evolution in terms of the interest for sustainability, comparing Italy, Spain, and France, we'll see how the hottest places, Spain and Italy, has a much higher increase in terms of conversations regarding that.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. The three countries, two of the three countries you mentioned there are right in the hub of what's happening. So they're going to be more aware, definitely. Now, gentleman over there, I think, wants to ask a question. Yeah.
I just want to kick back a little bit on the sort of safety aspect of travelling and your.
Could you put your microphone close to your mouth?
So I just want to kick back a little bit on the whole comment about safety when you're travelling, and you gave the really good example of putting a helmet on your head when when you're in India or wherever. Many of us do various sports. You may define them as being extreme if they're kite surfing or scuba diving or whatever, but if you want to be safe, stay on your couch at home. Don't go anywhere. We do these things because they get our blood going. We build adrenaline. We feel we've tamed nature. We've learned. We've developed. And I'm just wondering, I don't want to go on. When I go on holiday, I don't want to get sick from COVID on the plane. something out of my control, but there's a lot of things that I want to feel that I am in control of. And so really the question is, how do you get that balance right? Because that's what makes the adventure, that's what makes the experience. And risk is an inherent aspect of, it's why we have insurance companies, that's an inherent aspect of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But do you know what? When we collect our industry data, the things that kill or injure people are not scuba diving, kite surfing, bungee jumping. Most of those industries are run really safely. They're run by professionals who are well trained, they've got the kit, they know the procedures. The vast majority, more than 50% of the things that hurt people are slips, trips and falls. They are slips, trips and falls on wet surfaces, on steps and uneven ground, and in dimly lit places and in unfamiliar environments. So it's not, they're not going to grab any newspaper headlines, but those are the things that cost Alistair money. They are the things that cost people, broken legs, broken wrists, a spoiled holiday. They're not the kind of newsworthy things, but the adventure sports, normally, those things don't pop up at all. Quad biking does, but that's not normally run in the same way that something like a scuba dive trip would be. That's people just going out, renting a quad bike and thinking it's like their bicycle.
But what about drunk people falling off balconies?
Yeah. We've had particularly in the Balearics here in Spain, about 5 years ago, there was a real spate, particularly of British tourists falling or jumping from height. And we did a lot of work during the following summer, as did the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the UK, to try and encourage people not to be. So again, looking at the sort of combi components, what was it around the environment and what they were doing at the time that meant they were more likely to suffer what's often a catastrophic injury or fatality. And we used lots of those techniques to try and help. And actually in 2019, the fatalities had reduced by over half. I can't claim that was all down to us. There were a whole load of factors at play there, but I hope it helped.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. When from an insurance perspective, there are two aspects that we take into account when we're looking at the pricing. And one is frequency, and one is severity. And I think the point you raise about scuba diving, but it could be skiing, it could be bungee jumping, doesn't really matter. Kathy's right; they're very well organised. So from a frequency perspective, the likelihood of you having an increased frequency of accident is fairly low. The challenge is if you do, the severity is high because you're more likely to have a more severe injury. So we have to, from an insurance perspective, we have a greater obligation in terms of health costs and repatriation and so on. I think for me, the really interesting point, and you mentioned about holiday head, at what point on our journey on going on holiday does that start to happen? Because for me, once you get holiday head, then I'm thinking severity and frequency is a big issue. And that picture that you shared of your son, if he falls off of that, from a frequency perspective, he's not more likely to fall off of that motorbike because he hasn't got a helmet on. But if he does, from a severity perspective, there's a lot of cost involved in trying to get him back to health again afterwards. So at what point on the journey from, is it on the way to the airport? Is it when we get into the airport? When do we lose that rational thinking around how do we keep ourselves safe? Or indeed, how do we keep ourselves sustainable? And do we replace that with holiday head? That's, for me, is really fascinating.
I mean, anecdotally, I would say it's literally as soon as you walk through the airport door, which is why British travellers don't have a great reputation abroad. I apologise on behalf of my compatriots, but, if you go into a typical airport pub or bar, 7 o'clock in the morning, you'll probably find a lot of British tourists in there. So at that point, all sense and reason has left their head, I would say.
And at that point, that's when the risk increases because we start to see some of the attitudes go out the window, and that's when the behaviours change and shifts considerably.
Okay, we are running out of time, but very quickly, I want to go through all of you. Solutions. What can you think of some instant practical solutions to push sustainability right to the forefront of the way we think when we're abroad? Can I start with you, Isabel?
Well, again, I think the solution begins with a sense of urgency. And I would say perhaps the recognition that this phenomenon of holiday head requires that the leadership of the travel and tourism industry to step up and do things that may be uncomfortable for them because they believe that the holiday goers are going to have some backlash. But the conversations that I've had over the time is that's not their concern. They don't want to go on holiday and be shamed or be made to make decisions about their towels or, they want to go have fun. So create an environment where they can be sustainable and fun, and don't rely on them to tell you what to do.
Very good. Catherine.
I would say, yeah, absolutely. We want holidays to be fun. Please stop thinking that telling people about something is going to make them act differently. We've got loads of research and evidence to show we can use applied psychology to keep that wonderfulness that is a holiday and keep travel safe and sustainable. So why don't we use the tools that we have?
I think for me, there's two aspects. One is when you're talking about it from a sustainability perspective, I like the point that Carlos made, which is think local. Do what the locals are doing, because if you can adapt what they're doing, then you can have a less of an impact on the destination you're going to. But from a risk and a safety perspective, think home. Treat yourself how you would do it at home. If you wouldn't take those risks at home, don't take them when you go on holiday.
That reminds me of a lovely quote. We'll come to you in a second. A lovely quote by somebody who says, "We travel thousands of miles to meet people who are just, and to be fascinated by them, who are just like the people that live next door to us, but we just don't talk to them." That, I mean, it's a parallel situation, isn't it? Carlos.
I would recall the subject of education, and it's related to that. I mean, it's about investing in education of the host communities and the industry and the companies that are making money of all this system should think on this and help possibly the governments at the local economies, the hosting communities to get that education, and then measuring, which is my part, absolutely.
Absolutely. Listen, fascinating discussion. We could talk about much more about this, and I'm sure maybe you will later on today. If you see these people around, collar them, ask them, and pursue their points, and ask them what they really mean. But thank you so much for joining me. Really interesting discussion. Thank you. Stick, because we're going straight to the next session.